Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for this Tuesday afternoon show featuring Speaker of the House, Nicholas Mattiello. Thank you for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me, Kate. Pleasure.
Hard to believe it's just been 1 week today. This was the final stretch on Election Day, declared victory election night, and then had a raucous caucus on Thursday to get the votes to be Speaker of the House once again. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how election season panned out, and of course the caucus on Thursday.
Well, it was a long election summer. Everybody worked hard, and I thank all my volunteers, and I'm glad it's over. But I enjoy talking to my constituents. It's a good time of year. You really learn what people are thinking, and the election numbers were good. So I'm very grateful to my constituents in District 15, Cranston.
And what do you think made the difference that put you out on top? Of course, your race against Republican, Steve Fry's, the redux from 16 was tapped as one of the top races to watch. Why do you think you emerged successful?
Very simply, policy. The work we've done, good work, trumped politics. We just informed people. We ran a very positive campaign, and we informed my constituents of the things we've done, the things we want to do, and they liked the work we did. And that's just hard, very, very hard to overcome. So, and I was very pleased with that. I would be very concerned if politics, negative politics overcame good work. It would just set a bad precedent for the future.
And of course, some of the groups that had been sort of gunning for your ouster between the Coalition Against Gun Violence, Rhode Island Now, and the Rhode Island Latino PAC. Now, during the campaign, you had said they were sort of ultra-left progressive groups, and I think the Latino PAC took a step back. The head of the Latino PAC had written a piece basically questioning Matt Brown's position versus Governor Gina Raimondo, saying that they had supported conservative and Republican and Dan McKee. What would your response be to that they said they're not that progressive?
Well, I respectfully disagree with them. They came into my district on, I think, a Second Amendment issue. My district is pretty supportive of the Second Amendment, and they aligned themselves with ultra-progressive groups. So they were acting in an ultra-progressive manner, ultra-liberal, and they were campaigning in my district against the wishes and the best interest of the citizens of my district.
Now, I know we've had the Latino PAC president on here too. One of the questions that he had was the use of the terminology illegal alien versus immigrants in some of your campaign literature. Do you think that you have a good connection with the Latino community? I
have an excellent connection with the Latino community. This is just one individual PAC, and I have no idea what they were doing in my district. So I just don't know. But I have an excellent relationship with my Latino colleagues in the House, and I'm an attorney. I represent a lot of Latinos, and I have a great relationship with that community. He was just out of step with his own community.
Let's talk a little bit about the groups and the makeup of the Assembly moving into 19. Of course, the progressives as well as the Republicans now at 9. Now, looking at a little bit of a divided chamber, some have said maybe looking back to Carlin and Bevilacqua, but what's your thoughts on, there's been some chatter, could the progressives and the Republicans align on any issues? Do you see that happening?
Well, let me say, first of all, every issue is different, but I do not see the Republican caucus aligning with the Progressive caucus. They share absolutely nothing in common, and I look forward to working with both caucuses, and on average, caucuses and people are driven by issues and the things they care about. So we'll work with everybody on things they care about, and I wouldn't be surprised if on different issues people of some of these caucuses just go a different way, and because we all care about different things, we're not all the same.
Speaking of all the same, the first budget that you introduced when you were Speaker got unanimously approved. I'm assuming you do not anticipate this in the 2019 session.
Well, we could always be optimistic, but I anticipate getting a solid 50+ votes on the budget. What it is right now, I'm not gonna predict.
And so let's talk a little bit about the budget. Obviously, that's always the big focal point moving forward. But let's talk about the session as a whole, and as you've always touted, looking to drive business and business-friendly environment here in the state forward. Unemployment numbers are low. URI's Len Ladaro's Current Conditions Index, just today released, said it was, though, a disappointing third quarter with some concerns about the economic performance in Rhode Island. What are you looking to achieve in this upcoming General Assembly session that can really, again, move that needle for Rhode Island's economy forward?
Well, you have to continue on job development, training our employees to be the best in the region, if not the country. You have to make sure we're competitive tax-wise. Our regulatory system really has to be looked at. We have to look at that much more closely and just make sure we have an environment that's competitive. We're seeing it nationally. We're seeing it in Rhode Island. If you have a competitive environment, the businesses will rise up to the challenge and do their job, and we're seeing it. But we just have to do more, and we have to keep moving in the right direction. And all of the things that drive an economy have to move in the right direction. And one of the things that I do, usually every year or every 2 years, is speak to Len Ladaro and get some ideas from some of the experts on what best to do. But we'll be very focused on the economy. And I have to work with the governor. We've got a meeting that's going to be set up very soon, and the Senate president. And ultimately, it's a collaborative effort.
And so let's talk, you talked about the economic priorities up at the Assembly, and always the car tax reduction and elimination has been high on your list of priorities. But what would you say are your top priorities this coming session?
My very top priority is the car tax elimination. People are really anxious for it across the state, and you saw that in this election cycle. The level of anger that we had 2 years ago was greatly reduced. In fact, I would say people were relatively happy with their government. We made some decisions that people are very comfortable with, and they responded at the polling places. So we're going to keep moving in the direction of responding to our citizens.
And let's talk a little bit about some of those initiatives at the Assembly level. Let's talk about the governor's statements made during the campaign that she would, now that she is reelected, would like to extend the free tuition from CCRI to 2 years at the other states' institutions as well. Now, GoLocal has reported on some of those numbers of the performance of the program. What's your thought on that? Do you think the program has been effective, and do you think it deserves a look for an expansion?
Well, I don't know if it's been effective yet. Let's give it another cycle or two and see what the numbers are and see what the outcomes are. But as far as an expansion, one of the things that I'm very concerned with is the sustainability of an expansion and making sure that the schools have the resources to be competitive and to be a place that Rhode Island citizens can be proud to send their kids. My son went to URI, and I was very proud to send them there. We have great programs at URI and RIC. We have to make sure that they remain competitive and that the resources are there. So I give the governor a lot of credit. Education and job development, job training, those are things that she really concentrates on, and that's great because we need to do more of it. But we have limited resources and we're competing with other states. So we'll have that conversation. I'm certainly not going to make a decision relative to that. I know what the issues are. I believe she certainly knows what the issues are. The Senate President knows what the issues are. All of our colleagues also. So we'll all collaborate and we'll see what's best. So I look forward to the collaboration.
Do you imagine this will be a conversation topic when you meet with the governor in the coming days?
Yes, I would imagine so. I believe it's a priority of hers. So if it's a priority of hers, it's something that's important that we have to consider, and we'll come up with a consensus as we move forward. But some things are just budget restricted, and if you don't have the revenues, you can't do it. So we'll see. We're moving the state in the right direction, but we still have budget challenges, and we'll effectively deal with those challenges. So it limits how much you can do at any one time.
And let's talk about something that's been obviously a big issue the past several months, past several years, how the General Assembly addresses issues of sexual harassment, specifically at the Assembly. Now, we've seen releases today from your leadership team about the sense of urgency when the Assembly gets back in 19 about addressing these. Let's talk a little bit about Blazejewski's proposal to establish an office specifically to deal with this at the Assembly. Your conversations with the representative and your thoughts on this piece of legislation.
Well, we're all thinking the same. I said on a different publication, a media outlet last week, that I want to get it out of my office, and I think that we have to have an office dedicated just for that. Only because if you looked in this election cycle, things were leaked out 1 week before the election. You know, there's too much politicizing of these very sensitive issues. So we're going to create an office with the expertise to deal with just this particular issue. And I've been working with Representative Blazejewski and my legal counsel, and we've already done a lot of research on this. So I expect we'll be moving forward relatively soon.
I was just going to ask, do you see it as being a top priority for movement when the General Assembly reconvenes?
Yes, it's a top priority. When I leave here, Kate, I'm going back to work on this very issue. This, you know, we have to create an office and hire someone, and so 1 or 2 or 3 people. So I'm going to work with Representative Blazejewski, my staff, and we'll set up appropriate policies and procedures. I don't know that it's ultimately going to be legislation or just creation of an office, and we don't need legislation to do that. So it's something that we're giving a lot of priority to. I may want to see it set up before session even starts on January 1.
Okay, we're going to continue to keep a close eye on that issue. And one that was a top issue during the last session as well, looking forward to 19, the statute of limitations on sex crimes and where Rhode Island stands comparative to other New England states, where things had ended sort of in 2018, and what do you expect moving forward? Will you give fair hearing to this legislation to look to extend the statute of limitations?
Oh, absolutely. That's an issue that was blown a little out of proportion. We had one representative advocating for this last time, and there was a fair share of resistance to it. The retroactivity of the bill was always the concern. So there's very legitimate concern about the retroactivity issue. There's a very serious fairness issue relative to that. But I do think that the statute should be made longer, and we had an agreement, I thought, with the representative who was proposing the legislation, and at the last minute the agreement fell apart and we didn't go forward with it. And that's fair. That happens with a lot of different pieces of legislation. So this year we'll go back at it and start and work on it and see what we can come up with. But I think everybody agrees, and it seems to have gained momentum. Now it's not one individual.
They had a rally or a press conference at the State House about it. So it has, as you mentioned, gathered some steam.
It's gathered steam,
and clearly they'll be putting some pressure on this issue up there.
And it doesn't really need a lot of pressure. It needs collaboration. It needs more hands in the soup, so to speak, so that we get more opinions. I never liked, even going back to when I was majority leader, when you only had one voice on an issue. I just felt as though you weren't getting enough input, plus and minus. So we have a lot more input. I've gotten input from the public. We've gotten input from other colleagues. I look forward to working with Representative McEntee on the issue, and I think we'll get something done.
And speaking of the public's input, when GoLocal had been in the polls with Harvard pollster John Della Volpe, 89% of respondents said that they think that the Attorney General here should look into the Catholic diocese and issues pertaining to sex abuse following now more than a dozen states. Should the AG in Rhode Island be looking into an investigation here?
I don't know. It depends on the facts. It's not something I focused on. If there's problems, they should look into it. My understanding, and this is just my very general understanding, is that the problems we've had in Rhode Island have been resolved decades ago, and that they have appropriate policies and procedures in effect. But if there are problems, absolutely the Attorney General should look into them. I don't know if there are or not.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit as well, some issues here in Providence. The proposal by Jason Fain to put a tower on the 195 land making its way through the Providence City Council, but of course it's a public policy issue. Your thoughts on that development here in Providence?
You know, as I speak to people, what I can tell you is most people want to see the development move forward, and that's both in Providence and outside of Providence. So the Senate President has a proposal. I'm happy to look at it, and I think it's something we have to give a lot of consideration to. However, it's a little drastic to usurp the zoning laws of a particular city, and that's something that a lot of people are not going to be comfortable with. So we'll have our conversations with the mayor of Providence and everybody involved. I will say this is a unique piece of land. It's predominantly a state piece of land that we acquired when the highway was relocated. So perhaps this is one piece of land where we can make an exception with and move forward. But most people want to see that go forward, and I'd like to see the project move forward also.
Speaking of economic development, let's tack to Pawtucket. Now, we obviously saw the fate of the Paw Sox. We have seen Mayor Don Grebian say that he needs state leaders with some assistance for Hasbro there as well. But let's talk a little bit about healthcare, the closure of Memorial Hospital. You've got one hospital group that's fine with its closure. There's one that's saying it needs to be reopened. That's 800 jobs. That's a big economic catalyst for the city of Pawtucket, especially at a time when there's issues, if there's questions pertaining to Hasbro. You know, what have your conversations been with Mayor Don Grebian about the role the assembly is going to be playing in this process? He talked about just the other week the need to talk with leadership about Hasbro, but between Memorial, let's speak to the latter. You know, can Memorial be say resurrected?
Well, the question with the Memorial is what the state's needs are, and I do believe there was the opinion that we had actually too many hospital beds. So that increases costs unreasonably. I'm not an expert. I will leave that to the Department of Health, and we'll take their recommendation as to how we should move forward. So I think that's a decision that should be arrived at by the experts, and we should follow where the experts want us to go. And relative to Hasbro, we're very fortunate as a state to have a world-class corporation like Hasbro headquartered here. So that's something that we are going to have to look at. And just this morning, I've had my administrative assistant reach out to the governor's staff and set up a meeting, and we'll be talking with the governor and the Senate president and the mayor and trying to address that situation most appropriately. I don't want to say what the options are right now, but we're going to give this high priority. It's a very important issue for Rhode Island.
Speaking of high priorities, you talked about going back to look at that legislation, work on the legislation regarding the potential for an office or position of oversight of sexual harassment in the General Assembly. You talked about meeting with the governor and the Senate president. Here we are, we're in the waning weeks of November into December. What are your priorities and what's on your list of things before the General Assembly comes back in January?
Well, as I've said, my priority is the car tax phase out. I've promised that to the citizens. They really responded well to that. It's something that everybody across the state wants, and we're going to get that done for them. Secondly, jobs in the economy. So that means Hasbro, the situation with the headquarters, and I can see why they want a new headquarters. It's a world-class company in a very old factory building. So that's something that has to be addressed. And jobs in the economy, whatever we have to do tax-wise, regulatory, incentive-wise, education-wise, to move our economy forward, those are the things that we have to prioritize and work on. And giving jobs in the economy priority in the past has really brought us to where we are today. And it's much improved over the last 4 or 5 years. But even with an improved economy, we have a lot of work to do, and we have to keep moving in the direction of a better economy. So that's going to remain my priority. Relative to sexual harassment issues, I do want to say this, and even Rep. Tanzi said, you know, it's not like it's being portrayed, and I think she said it's not Animal House, so I will say it's not like it's being portrayed. We've had a couple of allegations. We've had no vetting of those allegations. Let's please keep that in mind. Most of the women that I talked to in the General Assembly have never felt harassed by anybody, but because it's a sensitive issue and you want everybody to feel as comfortable and secure as possible, it's going to get high priority. And I'm hoping that by January 1, when we start session, we have an office in place that's dedicated to addressing that issue and making people feel more comfortable.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in here again just 1 week after Election Day as we look ahead to the 2019 General Assembly session. Speaker Nick Mattiello, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Appreciate your watching. We'll be back here tomorrow in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. But again, stay tuned for this evening at the City Plan Commission as they take up a proposal for further development on Blackstone Boulevard here in Providence. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.